The marble floors of Rothtech's 42nd floor lobby felt cold against 7-year-old Lily Roth's legs as she sat cross-legged, her small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Corporate executives in tailored suits stepped carefully around her, their conversations never pausing, their eyes never meeting hers. From across the expansive lobby, Ethan Walsh approached quietly, his custodial uniform a stark contrast to the polished business attire surrounding them. He knelt beside Lily without a word, pulling a small bottle of bubble solution from his pocket. As delicate spheres began floating through the air, catching the afternoon light like tiny rainbows, the child's breathing slowly steadied. High above on the executive floor, CEO Vivienne Roth stood frozen at her corner office window, watching a janitor accomplish what she never could, reaching her daughter's heart with simple, unconditional kindness. Vivienne pressed her palm against the floor-to-ceiling glass, her breath fogging the pristine surface as she watched the scene unfold 30 floors below. The distance felt infinite, not just the physical space between her corner office and the lobby, but the emotional chasm she'd unknowingly created between herself and her daughter. She remembered being Lily's age, sitting alone in similar corporate lobbies while her parents attended endless meetings, feeling invisible among the rushing adults in their expensive clothes. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd built this empire to give Lily everything she'd never had, yet somehow she'd recreated the exact isolation she'd sworn to prevent. Ethan didn't just blow bubbles. He settled onto the cold marble floor beside Lily, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He spoke in quiet tones that Vivienne couldn't hear from her elevated perch, but she could see the effect the way Lily's rigid shoulders began to relax, how her tear-streaked face turned toward him with cautious curiosity. The janitor pulled something from his cart, a small coloring book and crayons, and spread them on the floor between them. Vivienne watched as her daughter smiled, actually smiled for the first time in weeks. When was the last time she had made Lily smile like that? The question hit her like a physical blow. The bustling executives continued their choreographed dance around the pair on the floor, their expensive shoes clicking against marble as they navigated around this small island of calm. Some glanced down with mild irritation at the obstruction to their efficient paths, others with fleeting curiosity, but none stopped. This was the world Vivienne had created, a place where productivity and profit took precedence over everything else, where a child's tears were an inconvenience to be stepped around rather than a soul to be comforted. Ethan seemed oblivious to the corporate ballet around him. His entire focus remained on Lily, and Vivienne found herself studying his patient movements, the way he listened when Lily spoke, how he nodded seriously at whatever she was telling him. There was something almost sacred about the scene, this gentleman in his simple uniform, treating her daughter with a reverence that all of Vivienne's wealth and power had never been able to provide. She realized with startling clarity that in building walls to protect Lily from the world, she'd also built walls between them. The afternoon sun slanted through the lobby's massive windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Vivienne watched as Ethan helped Lily to her feet, steadying her with a gentle hand on her shoulder before gathering up the coloring supplies. Her daughter looked up at him with something that made Vivienne's chest tighten, pure trust, the kind she used to see in Lily's eyes when she looked at her mother. When had that changed? When had Vivienne become just another adult in an expensive suit, too busy to see that her child was drowning in plain sight? As Ethan walked Lily toward the elevator bank, Vivienne saw him point upward, undoubtedly explaining that her mother would be down soon. Lily nodded, but there was no excitement in her posture, no anticipation of their reunion. Instead, there was resignation, the weary acceptance of a 7-year-old who'd learned not to expect too much from the adults in her life. The realization cut deeper than any boardroom defeat Vivienne had ever experienced. She'd spent years climbing to the top of this glass tower, but somewhere along the way, she'd left the most important person in her life far below. Lily's days had become a carefully orchestrated symphony of expectations, each note precisely timed and perfectly executed, and utterly exhausting for a 7-year-old soul. Her mornings began at 6:30 with Mandarin lessons via video call with Mrs. Chen, followed by a breakfast of organic steel-cut oats that she barely touched while reviewing vocabulary flashcards. The ride to Brightwood Academy was spent listening to classical music that was supposed to enhance cognitive development, according to the latest article Vivienne had forwarded to their driver. By 7:45, Lily was deposited at the steps of the most prestigious private school in Manhattan, her small backpack heavy with the weight of expectation. The academy prided itself on creating future leaders, but for Lily, it felt more like a beautiful prison. Her days were packed with accelerated mathematics, creative writing workshops, and science labs that would challenge most middle schoolers. After regular classes came violin lessons with Maestro Rodriguez, who insisted on perfection in every bow stroke, followed by French conversation with Mademoiselle Laurent, who corrected Lily's pronunciation with the dedication of a drill sergeant. Tennis lessons, coding club, and academic chess rounded out her schedule, leaving no room for the simple pleasure of being a child. But it was the waiting that broke her spirit. Every afternoon, Lily found herself in the Rothtech lobby, perched on the edge of an oversized leather chair, watching the elevator numbers light up and hoping this would be the time her mother would emerge. The executives who swept past her existed in a different world, one of urgent phone calls, clicking heels, and conversations filled with words like synergy and optimization. They moved with purpose and power, while Lily sat small and still, trying to make herself invisible so as not to disappoint anyone with her presence. The panic attacks had started 3 months ago, beginning as a flutter in her chest during a particularly difficult violin recital. Mrs. Harrison, her private tutor, had dismissed it as performance anxiety, suggesting more practice time. But the flutter had grown into a crushing weight that settled on Lily's chest at random moments during Mandarin lessons when she couldn't remember the tones, in the back seat of the car when the classical music felt too loud, and especially here in the lobby surrounded by the corporate energy that seemed to electrify everyone except her. Vivienne had noticed, of course. How could she not when her daughter's teacher called to report that Lily had locked herself in the bathroom during science class? But Vivienne's solutions came from the same playbook that had built her empire. Identify the problem, allocate resources, optimize outcomes, more tutoring to reduce academic stress. A child psychologist, Dr. Martinez, who came highly recommended and charged $300 per session. A new bedroom designed by a color therapist who specialized in creating calming environments. Everything except the one thing Lily needed most, her mother's undivided attention. Dr. Martinez had explained that children of high-achieving parents often internalized pressure in unexpected ways. She'd used terms like perfectionist anxiety and achievement stress disorder, words that made Vivienne feel like she was failing at the most important job she'd ever had. But even the therapy sessions became another appointment in Lily's schedule, another task to be completed and optimized. The irony was devastating in trying to give Lily every advantage. Vivienne had created a childhood that felt more like a corporate training program than a time for wonder and discovery. Ethan had noticed the changes in Lily's demeanor during his evening cleaning rounds. He'd seen her go from a curious child who would wave shyly from her chair to a withdrawn little girl who sat with her shoulders hunched, her breathing shallow and rapid. His professional instincts, dormant but never truly gone, recognized the signs immediately. This wasn't just a child who was tired or overwhelmed. This was a little soul in genuine distress, and every fiber of his being ached to help her. Ethan Walsh had once been Dr. Ethan Walsh, a man whose business cards read licensed clinical psychologist, specializing in childhood anxiety and trauma. His office at the Children's Behavioral Health Center on East 73rd Street had been a sanctuary painted in warm blues and greens, filled with soft cushions, art supplies, and carefully chosen toys that helped young clients express emotions they didn't yet have words for. He'd spent 15 years of his career helping children navigate the complex landscape of their inner worlds, developing a reputation for his gentle approach and remarkable success rate with severe anxiety cases. The transformation from Dr. Walsh to Ethan the janitor hadn't happened overnight. It had been a slow erosion, like watching a sandcastle dissolve with each incoming wave. When Sarah, his wife of 12 years, was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer, their world shifted on its axis. The medical bills mounted despite their insurance. Experimental treatments required travel to specialized clinics, and the demands of caregiving meant that Ethan could no longer maintain his full patient load. He'd reduced his practice, then suspended it entirely, pouring all of his energy into fighting a battle they would ultimately lose. Sarah's death had left him with two profound losses: the love of his life and the career that had defined him. Without the continuing education credits required to maintain his license, and with mounting debt from Sarah's treatment, Ethan found himself starting over at 36 with an 8-year-old son who was drowning in his own grief. Jack had stopped speaking for 3 months after his mother's funeral, communicating only through drawings that grew darker and more chaotic with each passing week. It was during those long, silent evenings that Ethan discovered the healing power of simple presence, sitting beside his son without trying to fix anything, just being there in the darkness together. The job at Rothtech had been a necessity, not a choice. Night cleaning paid well enough to cover their modest apartment in Queens and Jack's expenses, and the hours allowed Ethan to be home when Jack returned from school. He'd expected to feel bitter about the dramatic shift in his circumstances, pushing a cart through the halls of corporate power when he'd once sat across from senators' children in his private practice. Instead, he found unexpected peace in the rhythmic nature of his work, the methodical way he moved through each floor, the quiet satisfaction of leaving spaces cleaner than he'd found them. But it was impossible for Ethan to completely shut off the part of himself that had spent years studying the intricate patterns of childhood distress. When he first noticed Lily sitting alone in the lobby, his trained eye immediately cataloged the signs. The way she held herself so still it was almost unnatural, the rapid, shallow breathing, the hypervigilance that kept her scanning the room for threats that existed only in her anxious mind. She reminded him of so many children he'd worked with, bright, sensitive souls who internalized the pressure around them until it became a weight too heavy for their small shoulders to bear. The decision to help hadn't been conscious or calculated. It had been as natural as breathing. When he saw Lily having her first panic attack in the lobby, her small body rigid with terror as the world crashed around her, every instinct he'd developed over 15 years of practice kicked in. The bubble solution had been Jack's, left in his cart from their afternoon together. But the technique was pure professional instinct, creating a focal point, encouraging deep breathing through gentle play, offering comfort without overwhelming a frightened child. Vivienne Roth had built her empire on the premise that success was the ultimate form of protection. If she could make enough money, wield enough influence, and climb high enough in the corporate hierarchy, she could shield her daughter from every possible harm. It was a philosophy born from her own childhood experiences, growing up as the daughter of two investment bankers who viewed parenting as another portfolio to manage. Her parents had provided every material advantage while remaining emotionally unavailable, and Vivienne had sworn to be different while somehow repeating the exact same patterns. The divorce from David Roth 3 years earlier had only intensified her drive to succeed. She'd thrown herself into building Rothtech with the fury of a woman who had something to prove, not just to the tech world that questioned every decision made by a female CEO, but to herself. Each successful product launch, every percentage point of market share gained, and every glowing profile in business magazines felt like armor she was building around Lily's future. If she could just work hard enough, smart enough, and ruthlessly enough, she could create a world where her daughter would never feel vulnerable or powerless. But success in the corporate world required sacrifices that Vivienne had convinced herself were temporary. Late nights became the norm as she navigated hostile takeover attempts and competitive product launches. Weekend business trips to Silicon Valley and overseas markets stretched into full weeks. Board meetings, investor calls, and strategic planning sessions filled every available hour, leaving precious little time for bedtime stories or playground visits. She'd hired the best nannies, enrolled Lily in the finest schools, and surrounded her with educational opportunities that most children could only dream of, all while missing the simple truth that what Lily needed most was her mother's presence. The corner office on the 42nd floor had become both her kingdom and her prison. From behind the mahogany desk that had cost more than most people's cars, Vivienne commanded a tech empire worth over $2 billion. She could make decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of users worldwide. Politicians sought her opinion, competitors studied her strategies, and business schools taught case studies based on her unconventional rise to power. Yet none of that influence seemed to matter when it came to the one relationship that should have been the most natural in the world. Watching Ethan comfort, Lily had shattered something inside Vivienne that she'd spent years carefully constructing. The ease with which he'd connected with her daughter, the immediate trust Lily had shown him, highlighted everything that was missing from their own relationship. When had she last sat on the floor with Lily? When had she last really listened to her daughter's concerns without simultaneously checking email or mentally rehearsing talking points for the next meeting? The questions multiplied like a virus in her mind, each one revealing another way she'd failed the person who mattered most. The realization that she'd become exactly like her own parents felt like a physical blow. She'd spent her entire adult life defining herself in opposition to Robert and Patricia Chen Roth, two brilliant, successful, and utterly cold individuals who had treated their daughter more like a reflection of their own achievements than a person worthy of unconditional love. Yet here she was, 35 years old and at the pinnacle of professional success, watching a janitor provide her daughter with the emotional support that should have been her responsibility. The irony was that Lily had never asked for private tutors or exclusive schools or a bedroom that looked like it belonged in an interior design magazine. She'd asked for simple things: for mommy to read her a story at bedtime, for someone to listen when she talked about her day, for permission to just be a 7-year-old without the weight of extraordinary expectations pressing down on her small shoulders. These were requests that couldn't be outsourced to staff or solved with increased budgets, and their simplicity had somehow made them the hardest for Vivian to fulfill. The afternoon when Ethan first brought Jack to the office, Lily was in her usual spot in the lobby, coloring half-heartedly in a workbook while waiting for her mother's meeting to end. She'd grown accustomed to the rhythm of corporate life, the urgent conversations that swept past her, the clicking of heels against marble, the electronic chimes of elevators arriving and departing. It was a lonely soundtrack, but familiar, and familiarity offered its own form of comfort to a child who'd learned to expect solitude. Jack Walsh appeared like a gentle disruption to her carefully ordered world. At 8 years old, he possessed the kind of quiet maturity that comes from experiencing loss too young, but his eyes still held the curiosity and kindness that tragedy hadn't been able to steal. He'd been to the office before with his father, but always stayed close to Ethan's side, observing the corporate environment with the wariness of a child who understood he didn't quite belong in this polished world. Today, however, something was different. Maybe it was the way Lily sat so perfectly still, like a small statue among the bustling adults. Or maybe it was the recognition of another child who knew what it felt like to be alone in a room full of people. "My dad says you come here every day," Jack said, settling cross-legged on the floor beside Lily's chair with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to making friends wherever he went. He pulled a battered tablet from his backpack, its screen protected by a case covered in stickers from various museums and science centers. "Want to see something cool? I found this game where you build bridges, but they have to be strong enough for trucks to drive across. It's like engineering, but fun." For Lily, who'd spent most of her social time with adults or in structured activities with classmates she barely knew, Jack's easy friendship felt like discovering a secret room in a house she'd lived in her whole life. She'd been taught to be polite to strangers, to speak when spoken to, and to always remember that she was representing not just herself but the Roth family name. But Jack didn't seem to care about any of that. He was simply a boy with a tablet and a genuine interest in sharing something he enjoyed, asking nothing more from her than her authentic attention. The bridge-building game became their first shared language. Jack explained the physics concepts in terms that made sense to a 7-year-old, while Lily's systematic approach to problem-solving impressed him in ways that made her feel genuinely valued for who she was, not what she achieved. They worked together to design increasingly complex structures, celebrating successful crossings and laughing at spectacular collapses. For the first time in months, Lily's laughter echoed through the Rothtech lobby, spontaneous, joyful, and utterly free of performance or pretense. Ethan watched from a discreet distance as he went about his cleaning duties, his heart lifting at the sight of two children finding connection in the sterile corporate environment. He recognized something profound happening, not just friendship, but mutual healing. Jack had been carrying the weight of his mother's death for over a year, and while he'd made remarkable progress, there were still moments when grief would settle over him like a heavy blanket. But in explaining things to Lily, in being the older child who could offer guidance and companionship, Jack was rediscovering parts of himself that had been dormant since Sarah's death. For Lily, Jack represented everything her structured world had been missing: spontaneity, genuine curiosity, and the simple pleasure of being understood by someone her own age. He didn't care about her violin performances or her Mandarin vocabulary. He wasn't impressed by her mother's corporate success or intimidated by the expensive clothes and accessories that marked her as different from most children. To Jack, she was simply Lily, a smart, funny girl who was really good at engineering games and who seemed to need a friend as much as he did. Their afternoon sessions became a ritual that both children looked forward to with an intensity that surprised their respective parents. Jack would arrive with his father, settling immediately beside Lily's chair to share whatever new discovery had captured his imagination that day. Sometimes it was origami patterns he'd learned from a library book, folded carefully from paper napkins begged from the lobby coffee station. Other times it was riddles and brain teasers, or collaborative storytelling where they took turns adding sentences to increasingly elaborate adventures. The games were simple, requiring nothing more than imagination and mutual interest, but they filled a need in both children that no amount of structured activities had been able to address. Vivienne found herself adjusting her schedule to witness these interactions, leaving meetings a few minutes early to observe from the elevator bank as her daughter experienced something she'd forgotten. Children were capable of pure, uncomplicated joy. The sight of Lily's face lighting up when Jack arrived, the way she saved interesting facts and stories to share with him, the comfortable silences they could share while working on tablet puzzles, all of it revealed aspects of her daughter's personality that had been hidden beneath layers of anxiety and expectation. This was who Lily was when she felt safe to simply be herself, and the realization both thrilled and devastated Vivienne in equal measure. The investigation into Ethan's background had begun innocently enough, a simple curiosity about the man who'd shown such kindness to her daughter. Vivienne had asked her assistant, Marcus, to run a standard background check, expecting to find exactly what she saw: a reliable employee with a clean record and no red flags. What she discovered instead read like a cosmic joke played by an indifferent universe, each revelation more stunning than the last. Dr. Ethan Michael Walsh, licensed clinical psychologist, New York State license. Number 47892. Doctorate in child psychology from New York University, graduated summa cum laude. 15 years of clinical experience at Children's Behavioral Health Center, specializing in anxiety disorders, childhood trauma, and family therapy. Published researcher with dozens of articles in peer-reviewed journals. Former consultant to the Department of Education on implementing mental health programs in public schools. The credentials were impressive enough to make most corporate executives envious, let alone a janitor pushing a cart through their halls. But it was the employment records that made Vivienne's blood run cold. 2 years earlier, almost to the day, Dr. Ethan Walsh had submitted a meticulously crafted application for the position of senior child psychologist at RothTech, a role that Vivienne herself had approved, creating as part of their comprehensive employee wellness program. His cover letter had been thoughtful and specific, demonstrating clear knowledge of RothTech's corporate culture and expressing genuine enthusiasm for developing innovative mental health resources for employees' families. His resume was flawless, his references glowing, and his salary requirements modest for someone of his caliber. The application had never reached human eyes. RothTech's applicant tracking system, a sophisticated piece of software designed to streamline the hiring process by automatically screening thousands of applications, had flagged Dr. Walsh's submission for a technical error. His resume, meticulously formatted in a slightly older version of PDF software, contained embedded fonts that the ATS couldn't properly scan. The system had categorized his application as incomplete and automatically moved it to a digital rejection pile that no one ever reviewed. Within 24 hours, an automated email had been sent thanking him for his interest and informing him that his qualifications didn't meet their current needs. Marcus had pulled the hiring records for that position with the grim efficiency of an assistant who knew his boss well enough to anticipate her reaction. The role had ultimately been filled by Dr. Jennifer Morrison, a competent psychologist with 5 years of experience and a degree from a respectable but unremarkable graduate program, Dr. Morrison had been hired not because of superior qualifications, but because her brother-in-law was a RothTech board member who'd mentioned her availability during a casual conversation at a charity golf tournament. She'd been perfectly adequate in the role, but had left after 18 months to move to Portland with her husband, and the position had remained unfilled since her departure. The mathematics of the situation were devastatingly simple. RothTech had rejected the most qualified candidate they'd ever received for a position they desperately needed to fill, then hired someone with a fraction of his experience through nepotism, only to lose that person anyway and leave the role vacant. Meanwhile, the man they'd rejected had been forced to take a janitorial position in their own building, where he'd been providing the exact services they'd needed: professional quality child psychology support for free, to the CEO's own daughter, while emptying their trash cans for minimum wage. Vivienne stared at the documents spread across her desk, each page revealing another layer of institutional failure that she'd overseen as the company's leader. The ATS system she'd approved had been marketed as a revolutionary tool for identifying top talent, but it had systematically eliminated the most qualified candidates while advancing mediocre ones with better connections. How many other Dr. Walshes had they lost to technological discrimination? How many brilliant minds were pushing carts through corporate hallways because algorithm prejudice had deemed their file formats inadequate? But the professional failure paled in comparison to the personal revelation. Her daughter had been struggling with severe anxiety for months, receiving professional quality therapeutic intervention from one of the most qualified child psychologists in the state, and Vivienne hadn't even known it was happening. While she'd been paying Dr. Martinez $300 per session for appointments that Lily dreaded, the man mopping her floors had been providing more effective support through simple human connection and professional expertise, applied with genuine care rather than clinical detachment. The confrontation Vivienne had imagined never materialized. Instead, she found herself standing in the break room on the 38th floor at 11:30 on a Thursday night, watching Ethan Walsh methodically clean coffee makers with the same attention to detail he'd once brought to psychological assessments. He looked up when she entered, showing no surprise at finding the CEO in a space typically reserved for night staff, and offered the same gentle smile he'd given Lily during her panic attack. "Mrs. Roth," he said simply, continuing his work without the nervous deference she'd grown accustomed to from employees. "Is everything all right? Lily's not still in the building, is she?" The question revealed so much about his character. His first concern was for her daughter's welfare, not his own job security or the unusual circumstances of a CEO seeking him out during his shift. Vivienne had prepared a speech, carefully crafted talking points about system failures and missed connections, but faced with his genuine warmth, the corporate language dissolved. "I know who you are," she said instead, the words coming out more like a confession than an accusation. "Dr. Walsh. I know about your application, about the ATS error, about everything we missed. I know that you've been helping Lily, and that you're probably the most qualified person who's ever worked in this building to do exactly what she's needed." Ethan paused in his cleaning, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to something deeper, not anger or resentment, but a kind of weary recognition. "I wondered when you might figure it out," he admitted. "I wasn't trying to hide anything. The name on my uniform is the same one on my degree. But I also wasn't going to demand recognition for doing what felt right." They talked for over an hour in that sterile break room, two parents trying to navigate the gap between their professional competence and their personal failures. Ethan spoke about Sarah's illness and death, about the impossible choice between career and caregiving, about finding purpose in simple work and unexpected connections. Vivienne shared her own struggles with inherited patterns of emotional distance, about the weight of breaking generational cycles while building corporate empires, about the discovery that success could be its own form of failure. "Jack talks about Lily every day," Ethan told her as he finished his rounds. "She's brilliant, you know. Not just academically, emotionally intelligent in ways that most adults never achieve. But she's carrying weight that's too heavy for someone her age. She needs space to just be 7 years old, and she needs to know that she's valuable for who she is, not what she accomplishes." The words hit Vivienne like a physical blow, not because they were harsh, but because they were absolutely true. "I don't know how to do that," she admitted, the confession feeling like stepping off a cliff. "I don't know how to be the kind of mother she needs. I've been trying to give her everything I didn't have, but I think I've been giving her everything except what actually matters." "Then let's figure it out together," Ethan said simply. Not as CEO and janitor, not as doctor and patient, but as two parents who want their kids to be happy. The changes began small, almost imperceptibly, like the first hints of spring after a brutal winter. Vivienne started leaving her office 15 minutes earlier each day, not to rush Lily home to another scheduled activity, but to sit on the marble floor of the lobby and watch Jack teach her daughter origami. She learned to fold paper cranes and lotus flowers, her expensive manicure forgotten as she struggled with creases and angles that seemed to come naturally to 8-year-old fingers. The bubble breaks started as a joke, Ethan bringing his small bottle of soap solution to create a moment of whimsy during particularly stressful weeks. But they evolved into something more significant, sanctioned 15-minute periods when any Roth Tech employee could step away from their desk to engage in something purely joyful and non-productive. The legal department worried about liability, HR questioned the precedent, and several board members raised eyebrows at the frivolity. But productivity actually increased, stress-related sick days decreased, and employee satisfaction surveys showed the highest scores in company history. Ethan accepted the part-time consultant position with characteristic grace, splitting his time between individual counseling sessions with employees' children and developing mental health resources for Rothtech's family wellness program. But he kept his custodial duties as well, a decision that initially puzzled Vivienne until she understood his reasoning. "There's dignity in all honest work," he explained. "And some of my best insights come during the quiet hours when I'm thinking while I clean. Besides, Jack likes having the run of the office after hours. It's become our special time together." The friendship between Jack and Lily deepened into something that resembled siblinghood, protective, competitive, and utterly devoted. Jack taught Lily the coping strategies his father had developed for managing grief and anxiety: breathing exercises disguised as games, mindfulness techniques wrapped in storytelling, and the radical concept that it was okay to feel sad or scared without immediately trying to fix those feelings. Lily, in turn, helped Jack rediscover the joy of learning for its own sake, sharing her genuine fascination with science and literature in ways that had nothing to do with grades or achievement. Vivienne's relationship with her daughter required more patience and intentionality. Years of missed connections couldn't be erased by good intentions, and Lily had learned to protect herself from disappointment by expecting very little from their interactions. But slowly, moment by moment, Vivienne proved that this time was different. She learned to sit quietly while Lily processed difficult emotions instead of immediately jumping to solutions. She discovered that her daughter had inherited her analytical mind, but also possessed an empathy and emotional intelligence that Vivienne herself was still developing. The most profound change was the hardest to quantify: the shift from a household organized around schedule optimization to one built around authentic connection. Dinner became a time for sharing the day's experiences, rather than reviewing tomorrow's agenda. Bedtime stories replaced productivity podcasts. Weekend adventures were chosen based on curiosity rather than educational value. Lily's anxiety didn't disappear. It never would entirely, but it became manageable, a part of her that required attention and care rather than a problem to be solved or hidden. On a spring afternoon 6 months later, Vivienne found herself on the lobby floor again, this time by choice rather than crisis. Lily and Jack were collaborating on an elaborate chalk mural, their heads bent together in serious artistic consultation. The corporate executives still stepped around them, but now some paused to admire the artwork or exchange pleasantries with the children. The culture was shifting, one small interaction at a time. "You know what I realized?" Vivienne said to Ethan as they watched their children create something beautiful together. "I spent so much time trying to build walls to protect Lily from the world that I forgot to build bridges to connect with her." Ethan smiled, his attention split between their conversation and Jack's animated explanation of color theory to Lily. "The great thing about bridges," he replied, "is that they work in both directions, and it's never too late to start building them." The story didn't end with perfect healing or complete transformation. Real life rarely offers such tidy resolutions. Vivienne still struggled to balance the demands of running a major corporation with the needs of being present for her daughter. Lily continued to experience anxiety, particularly during times of change or high stress. Jack still carried the quiet sadness of a child who lost his mother too young, and Ethan remained a single father navigating the challenge of rebuilding a career while prioritizing his son's emotional well-being. But they'd learned something invaluable: that healing doesn't require perfection, only presence. That connection matters more than achievement, and that sometimes the most important help comes from the most unexpected places, like a janitor with a bottle of bubble solution and the wisdom to know that every child deserves to be seen, heard, and valued for exactly who they are.